Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey there, Linda and Rena. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you guys for joining me.
Hi, Tom. Hi.
I'm so excited to have you guys on. This is a milestone MSL Talk podcast episode because IQVIA is our first official sponsor. So what that means is I get to say really nice things about IQVIA, but it's not going to be hard because they're awesome. As a matter of fact, Fortune magazine ranked IQVIA one of the world's best companies to work for 5 consecutive years in a row. So awesome organization. Definitely encourage you guys to check them out at iqvia.com. And I would even encourage you to consider applying to MSL positions on their website. If you're an MSL leader and you're building an MSL team, I would definitely reach out and contact these guys. But more importantly, they are a leader in the industry. In human data sciences, they have a huge CRO, data analytics, and they're also building out a ton of functions in the medical affairs space. So I'm really honored to have you guys as our first sponsor. And I'm excited to talk to you guys about KPIs. So just to give you guys a little background, this topic came up. Linda and I were talking at MAPS this year. And I said, we got to this is a podcast. We should have recorded this and this would be a podcast. So here we are. I'm going to stop talking because I want to let Linda and Rena introduce themselves so that we can get into this. So Rena, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I'm Rena Patel. I'm the director here of Field Medical Affairs at IQVIA. So I'm actually an MD by training, and I started off my career in clinical research. After clinical research, I did some hospital training. And then most recently, prior to entering industry, I worked in academia. But while I was actually working in academia, I really knew I wanted to be an MSL. And it was a struggle to, break into industry, like a lot of people are realizing. So I had to do a lot of research. I took some courses that were offered to kind of get a better understanding of the role in medical affairs in general to make sure it was a good fit for me. I also, during that time, built my network of current MSLs, kind of reached out through LinkedIn and spoke to as many MSLs that I could at the time. And I finally actually broke into my first MSL role here at IQVIA. I started off my career in industry at IQVIA as an MSL. And from there, I kind of worked my way up to my current role, which again is Field Medical Affairs, which is Director of Field Medical Affairs at IQVIA. So I'm really excited.
I love that story. I love that story. And that's what this is all about. And I hope that people are listening or inspired by that. And can follow that path if that's where your heart wants to take you into the medical affairs space. So Linda, how about you?
Yeah, first of all, I met Rena before I joined IQVIA through the MSL Society. And that's a fun story that maybe we'll get to a little bit later. But Linda Trailer, I am new-ish to IQVIA. I joined in January of this year. But I am not new to industry. I'm going to go ahead and just say it out loud and date myself. I entered industry back in the late 90s after my postdoc at Duke University. And I started out kind of like Rena in clinical research and regulatory affairs, in-house and cell therapy and medical device space. I've done, MSL stints for 2 or 3 companies. I've been, leader of MSL teams and department head in my most recent job before joining IQVIA. And so I've had a long career and a varied career in that I've done multiple therapeutic areas, and really most of my decision-making in my career development has been around challenging myself and gaining new experiences to just get better. I really love this profession. I've stuck to it for the last 20 years. In the medical affairs mostly space, and I love this profession so much. I started being part of professional societies that finally started to materialize just about a decade or so ago through the MSL Society, the Medical Affairs Professional Society, where we've interacted in both places, actually. And what I think one of the things I love about this community and profession is that it is a bit of a community and a family, and it's a small world. I mean, we're running into each other at these conferences, and it's like seeing each other and continuing a conversation. And I also love paying it forward because somebody helped me. So I believe in, helping others who are along a similar path as you. And I also love working with people like you, Tom, that are about bettering the profession, because even though that it indirectly and directly affects what you do by getting better candidates and a better quality professional, it helps the industry as a whole. And I love this. I love the podcast that you've developed. I think the hard work and your work ethic show in the quality of this podcast. And so I'm very happy to be here.
I'll tell you, there's so much unpacking there. I am so excited to have you guys on. And I just want to say that if you guys listen to both Rena and Linda, they use the word networking. That's how this whole thing happened. That's how people get jobs. That's how we've been able to keep in touch. And my favorite part of this job is the relationships that I've been able to develop, the people that I've been able to meet. When I go to I talk about going to conferences all the time on this podcast. I love it. I'm like a little kid. You know why? Because I get to see my friends and I get to have good conversations, and then we get to make stuff like this happen. So Absolutely. Without further ado, we are going to talk about KPIs, which are also known as metrics, which is an interesting word because everybody has their own take on what this looks like. There's no standard in medical affairs. So this is something that you're going to get a lot of different opinions on, but I really value the two opinions that we're going to hear today. But before we get into a full-blown conversation, there might be a lot of people that are listening that don't really know what KPIs or metrics are. So Linda, why don't you tell everybody what KPIs mean?
Absolutely. So KPIs, it actually stands for Key Performance Indicators, and it is somewhat of an industry standard term, even though there aren't really industry standards on defining them for every company. So key performance indicators are just kind of what the title means. They are measures of measuring performance with specific types of indicators. And in the medical industry, for the most part, those performance indicators stem around revenue and product on the commercial side of business and at the leadership level. But on the medical side of business, where we have to bring value to the organization through less quantitative metrics because we are directly connected to the safety and well-being of patients, there's an inherent conflict of interest in using things like revenue and the product scripts and things like that to measure the medical or MSL specifically performance. And so this topic of KPIs and how to apply them to MSLs is a hot topic. It's been a hot topic for as long as the industry has been around, and it still is going to continue because the types of ways we can measure KPIs it's growing and it's going to evolve. It's never going to be a defined thing that everybody can reference it. This is what a KPI should be for an MSL. So It's going to be a great conversation today.
It's so true. And it's hard. This is hard. It's, on the sales side, when I was a sales rep, it was easy. They would just take the zip codes that you were responsible for and they'd pull prescriptions that were, the results of the prescriptions that were, purchased in those areas. And that's how you came up with your numbers. It was based on sales. But in the medical affairs space, it doesn't work that way. So you have to have something else to be able to show what is the value and how do you track things. So I use the term metrics. And Linda, you just explained what a KPI was. Are they the same thing?
So yeah, this is a tricky one since the terms metrics and KPIs are often used interchangeably, as we see, right, in conversations, but they're really not the same thing. Metrics are plentiful and they capture multifaceted areas of performance, such as activity, impact, quality kind of versus quantity. And they're actually capturing where we are today in accomplishing our performance objectives, right? But KPIs now move more around where we will end up, right? Based on these key indicators that we have. So KPIs should actually enable and enact decision-making. In other words, metrics measure process or progress, and KPIs are laser focused on those strategic objectives. They're not mutually exclusive. And sometimes we do find that metrics actually do become KPIs in some instances.
Got you. Yeah, that's awesome. Because, I'll tell you, I think a lot of people are a little confused by those terms, but that really puts it into perspective. Now, the question I have for you, Linda, you've been doing this a long time, and I know you've been with different organizations. Is there any standards that exist, in industry? And I know that, we look at, you mentioned Medical Affairs Professional Society and the MSL Society. So there's entities out there, but are there really any standards for this stuff?
Yeah, so I think the answer is yes. And some standards in the sense of defining what the MSL role is at a high level, setting some of the boundaries and restrictions on what MSLs can and cannot do, and maintain compliance, maintaining, activities that ensure patient outcomes and safety related issues. There's a lot of compliance around the MSL role. But in terms of standards, MSL Society has some guidelines on, defining what the MSL role is, and that is foundational to their certification program. MAPS has an incredible number of white papers and educational resources on, thought leaders giving their feedback on how to measure KPIs for an MSL. But I would say most companies have to, combine what they know about what the MSL role is, what it can and cannot do, and what are the corporate objectives, high-level strategy, what is the medical strategy. They have to be transparent in all of these to combine what the guidelines say an MSL can and cannot do and what the corporate objectives are, and come up with these ways of measuring and ensuring that the MSLs bring something to the table for furthering the business, but also ensuring patients' lives are improved.
Got you. Yeah. So then how does a company establish KPIs, and what is most important to track? What activities?
So I think establishing proper or meaningful KPIs are challenging, since they can vary depending on strategic objectives, right, for the product or device. And these objectives actually, they might change quarterly, right? And they're also dependent on where the product or device is in the product life cycle. So regarding some KPIs that are important, I guess, are number of interactions, the insights, and how the relationship with these thought leaders are advancing. And that can be done via surveys or even internal trackers that companies have.
I guess I would add also to that, because that's exactly, she hit the nail on the head. And I think it's this combination, and we have to be able to capture the day in the life of MSL through metrics to set some expectations for performance. But at the same time, it has to be not just the quantitative type of measures. There has to be some level of measuring what, MSLs are tasked with building relationships and communicating scientific and clinical outcomes, and measuring the value of that is not always quantitative. And so there needs to be some, melding of the two.
Yeah. Well, that's, as you're saying that, it makes me think, so how do you align those two? How do you align the quantitative versus the qualitative in
Absolutely.
your same set of KPIs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, because, companies, one of the things that it's an imperative for companies to do, and that is over-communicate corporate objectives. Medical affairs leaders need to be transparent of what the medical strategy is. And all MSLs need to be open to personal growth. And I think so marrying all of these together is where sort of the art of putting together KPIs exists. That's where leaders have to really figure out how to balance this. And so in my opinion, this is Linda Traylor's opinion, the key ingredients to establishing and aligning qualitative and quantitative metrics is really, it means involving the MSLs in the process, making sure the leaders should align with their peers at the leadership level, at the corporate level, but bring the MSL into the story. It gives them ownership, and it gives them a say in how they're bringing value to the organization, as well as ensuring, that they're improving the lives of patients through engaging clinicians. And so I think they need to have a say. And I think sometimes where companies maybe miss the mark is not involving the MSLs in the development of the KPIs, but also getting that independent review. So, engaging their cross-functional team members and aligning, making sure their department goals are aligned to the other, peer department goals, but also potentially even outsourcing the development of KPIs, because a lot of organizations such as IQVIA will offer offerings that support the development of KPIs with an independent view to it.
Yeah, for sure. And just for those that are following along that aren't 100% sure what all this means, it's very simple. A quantitative metrics would relate to like the number of visits. It's based on quantity. Qualitative would be the quality of the interaction, pretty self-explanatory. And even in the topic of this episode, we talk about how important the qualitative piece of it is and how important you want to influence the quality of the visit, not just the number of visits. So that being said, what really, what qualitative outcomes should MSLs be hopeful for?
So I see qualitative as impact, right? So the quality of information, let's say, for example, quality contained in continuing medical education, is going to be more subjective and complex to measure compared to the quantitative runs, right? As you said, the number of interactions or the number of topics. So certainly every program, therapeutic area, and molecule will have different objectives that they want to get to. And then quality metrics will be used to understand thought leaders' understanding for those actual disease states. So for example, unassisted awareness of disease symptomology, or maybe it's important to assess satisfaction after speaker training programs, or even satisfaction of the MSLs and the information they received. There might also be a critical need to ensure the patients are referred to the right specialist, right, in the outcome. So it's really important to understand those objectives to get to those qualitative outcomes and to be able to measure them.
Got you. Awesome. So would you say that KPIs are a way to assess value in the MSL or performance?
So this is a great conversation point, Tom, because I think it's yes to both.
Okay.
So I would say, just as Rena said, value is connected to the impact, the outcome, what you're trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. Whereas performance is connected to the MSLs and how they get there.
Right.
And I think KPIs have to be a mixture of both. And going back to a little bit of what Rena was saying, quantitative, you have to have some level of quantitative because there's expectation setting at a department level in terms of days in field and number of visits, length of visit. We try to get quality surrogate markers of quality through some of the quantitative, such as say a length of a meeting. If it's longer meeting, that suggests that you are having a quality conversation. Not always, but it could suggest it, right? whether or not you get a follow-up meeting. Those are the types of quantitative measures that potentially could give you an idea of quality. But the value is how that information exchange is then used for clinicians in practice, using your product, improving the lives of patients. And that has a high dependency on a lot of variables at the corporate level, at the department level, and at the MSL level. And we can't overlook the performance of the MSLs, because that ultimately the MSL's value should serve the patient, which is why we need to layer in patient level data and real world data into the KPIs, which we can talk a little bit later about.
Yeah, that's awesome. And every time you go to one of these conferences, there's always the conversation or the topic of how do MSLs bring value? So you just covered it. So if anybody is interested in that conversation, you, in a nutshell, you just covered it. So awesome stuff. So let's talk about the impact of COVID-19, how the pandemic changed the face of KPIs. So how it changed it, and then where is it going? I'm curious to see where we go from here.
So yeah, so prior to COVID, there was a lot of talk on quantitative versus qualitative KPIs, right? And how there really needs to be a push for the latter, so for the qualitative KPIs. And COVID, I think, really accelerated that, right? In the beginning of COVID, we had minimal, and these MSLs had minimal interactions, but leadership at the end was still asked to actually show the impact. So we really had to go hard, like to go and think about how to evaluate, think hard and how to evaluate our KPIs regularly, and to make sure that they were really aligned with our goals, right? And to see what was happening around us. We needed to make sure that every interactions MSLs were having was meaningful, and that they were able to actually capture actionable insights, and they were able to answer the questions, right, thought leaders had. So in the long run, I think the pandemic has definitely been good for KPIs, okay? But I do think KPIs will continue to evolve, and that our focus on quality and impact is going to move us in a direction of measuring outcomes. Our role, we have to remember, our role as an industry is to really make the world a healthier place. And our MSLs are these conduits to these HCPs to educate and gather insights. And those HCPs are actually the ones that are treating the patients. So we have to value that relationship that they have.
Right. Awesome. Yeah. Well, and I think that just the pure nature of not being able to travel had to have had an effect on it, and there's still less travel. So how does that play a big factor in this equation?
So I think we need to kind of, I guess, take a step back here and remember that the MSL's role is to be storytellers, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So with thought leaders and the healthcare system being bogged down, with this pandemic, time with these thought leaders is of the essence. So right now, they might only have 15 to 20 minutes on a virtual call. But it's the fact that, do they have the right information to discuss that's meaningful to the thought leader, right? And that's where impact measures are more important than ever. Because it isn't always the number of interactions or the length of these interactions. It is whether the MSLs are able to deliver that information needed in a concise way. And that's why quality of the interaction is much more important than quantity.
Yeah.
So I guess to answer, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. It's interesting that you should say that, because we're talking about a virtual we're coming from a virtual environment, but still being able to provide quality, even though you're not live, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So just providing that quality that's why the KPIs are getting pushed to more of these qualitative metrics. You're going to see more of these qualitative metrics that compose KPIs as opposed to quantitative metrics.
Yeah. And as we move forward, Linda, curious as to what you're feeling on the virtual and digital engagement aspect of the MSL of the future, and how KPIs are going to play a factor in that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the topic of every medical affairs leader and MSL team right now. Is during the pandemic, we were forced to level up our soft skills, right? Because face-to-face engagement for the last decade, there's been this balance of corporate objective-based KPIs versus individual performance-based KPIs, and developing soft skills and being good storytellers and communicators of that information. And now you layer in an environment, the digital and virtual environment that impacts the way in which we read our audience, and the amount of time we have, and whether or not it can force somebody to turn on their camera or not. And all of these variables impact a lot of the things we learned for our soft skills and nonverbal cues for engaging HCPs. So it's just made it more complicated. So it's forced us to kind of level up our soft skills. I think is probably the biggest thing that has come from a forced virtual environment. And now that we're moving forward, it's going to be at least hybrid. So those skills will only make your face-to-face engagements better, I think, because you've gotten better at active listening and really paying attention to the conversation because of the limitations of the virtual world. That's only going to make your face-to-face interactions better, I think. So now that we're moving back to a hybrid model, which is going to be, that's going to be the case for the foreseeable future, I just feel like the performance of the MSL is only going to get better.
Yeah. And Marina, what advice do you have for MSLs to stay focused and stay on track as it relates to their KPIs?
So I think a good way to stay focused and on track would be regular, whether it's weekly or monthly, review of their field tactical plans, right? To make sure that their tasks and actions that they're doing are aligning with their goals and objectives. Because we know when you're in the field, it's so easy to get distracted, with activities in the field that are not related to your overall goals. And then they are going to get sidetracked, and they're not going to get the outcomes that they wish that they were getting in the field.
Yeah. What about you, Linda? What's your thought? I'm curious to hear about how you keep people motivated too, on top of your advice for staying on track. But what's your philosophy on trying to keep people motivated?
Yeah, usually when I'm engaging a team of MSLs, so I have a lot of little one-liners that I kind of live by. One of them is just work hard and be nice, right? Just you gotta work hard to be well, but also kind of know thyself. Like coming from the Matrix, it's you really have to understand what your as an individual strengths and weaknesses are, what you bring to the table, ensuring that your voice is heard when it comes to developing KPIs. Ultimately, you want to develop, yourself as a professional that makes the company and your peers better while still improving the lives of patients. You have to marry all of that together. But to me, motivation is, some of it's innate. Like some people are just naturally self-motivated, and some people who aren't. One is easy to identify them, but also I think some aspect of it can be learned through developing behaviors that keep you focused. Because I think sometimes people lose motivation when they feel overwhelmed and don't have a clear direction on where they're going. And that's where KPIs can come in and help focus your everyday job so that you can tackle things in a way without feeling to be good at your job, to feel like you're making an impact without being overwhelmed by all the things that you could be doing. So I would say helping individuals stay focused motivates them to do better, and also giving them the opportunity to be heard. People like to be heard.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's a good time now there's so many resources available, and it's the best time ever to be a lifelong learner. There's books, there's podcasts, there's webinars, there's, like you said, the MSL Society, there's maps, there's meetings, conferences. I just think that there's almost, and this is going to sound terrible, forgive me for saying it, there's like almost no excuse
Yes.
for not being able to help yourself. Am I overstating that?
You are not overstating that in any way, shape, or form. no question. There are so many resources that I did not have access to when I was breaking into the field of the MSL and the medical affairs space. So no question that it's not very many clicks on your keyboard to get to some answers that are available and helping you move forward. There's just a lot of resources and a lot of people available at your fingertips. But that also brings, but one of the things that, one of the jobs I had in my career was being an MSL coach at Novartis. And I was on a team of exceptionally brilliant MSLs, but that's kind of a novel role. I kind of, helped like define what that role was. And in about less than 2 years, I traveled with over 110 MSLs, one-on-one in the field, coaching them, mostly focusing on soft skills, but just, mirroring them and observing them in their everyday life. And I got to see the full gamut of the bad performers and some of the most inspiring performers I've ever met. And to this day, I still have relationships. I'm drawn to people who are just that self-motivated, want to make an impact. And those are the ones that you don't ever want to disenfranchise with only quantitative KPIs that anybody can achieve. You need to measure impact because the high performers are the ones that are going to stand out with that.
For sure. And that said, Rena, what advice do you have for the MSLs out there that want to be top performers this year? How do they get there?
Again, I really think it's just kind of reviewing their FTP plans, their plans on a weekly basis, and kind of really setting that time part, right? Setting that time in your calendar, 30 minutes, an hour every week, whether it's the beginning of the week, the end of the week, to really review it and do that strategic thinking, right? How are my actions and goals? How are my actions and tasks? How are they going to benefit my overall goal I have for that week? And I think that will go a long way. And as long as they're doing that and they're seeing progress, and again, it's going to get adjusted, right? Every week, sometimes you're not going to meet your goals from the previous week, and that's okay, right? It's that continuous progress that you're going to see overall. I think that's going to make them to be a higher performer. And I also think as leadership, it's our job, right, to kind of know the personalities of the team members and to adjust in our motivation, right, and how we motivate them and how we help them with their FTP plans. Some of them are very goal orientated, and others, as Linda said, are naturally motivated. So with those people, we might not have to do a lot of coaching. We might not have to do a lot of hand holding, but there are going to be team members that you have to set time up, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, to get them motivated and get them started.
Yeah, that's great advice. Sometimes I'll tell you, people get so focused on the tactical piece of it, they don't spend any time being strategic and developing a plan as to where they should go. So it's like that expression, sometimes you have to focus on your territory and not just in your territory.
Definitely.
So Linda, what about you? What last piece of advice do you have for folks that are looking to increase their performance and improve their metrics and value and keep KPIs and all that good stuff?
I think I'm going to look at it from both the leadership perspective and the individual perspective. First, from a leadership perspective, there are so many new types of data that can be layered in to improving performance, KPIs, and making them more value-based, data-driven types of KPIs that motivate your high performers because it shows direct impact. And that's layering in real world evidence, real world data. The day precision medicine sort of is born out of, genetic biomarkers in the oncology space. But to be honest with you, it's something that we should all strive for as an industry. To improve patients' lives is to understand the patient at the patient level. And there's so many data points that we can layer into how we're impacting patients' lives, such as patient-reported outcomes. Patients are wearing, devices that feed information into They're healthcare providers, EMRs, lab data. And then now with the new analytic tools available, we have to think differently on how to layer in data, because it's the linking of the data that gives you valuable, insights and linking it to measuring performance of a team or individual or company. Now, on the individual level, though, I think it goes back to being what you said earlier, Tom, being that constant learner. I think it's never going to be, you're never going to be at a point where you know enough or know everything to do your job well. The world look at the way the world changed with just the pandemic and how we had to kind of flip our jobs on its head to redefine what KPIs and value is. Now, there's always going to be some evolution that you have to factor in. And so I agree with you. Be a constant, learner. Always be learning.
Oh, awesome. You guys, this was every bit as good as I thought it would be. I really appreciate you both. We got to do this again, without a doubt. And for all of you guys out there listening, this is why IQVIA is so awesome, because they have people like Rena and like Linda. So definitely check them out, iqvia.com, apply to jobs, check them out. And once again, thank you guys for your insights. You're really awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. You're awesome as well.
All right. Thanks. Take care, guys. Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.